Are live. Welcome everyone to this impromptu live session at 3 o'clock on a UK summer, very sunny day. It's great to have you with us. If you are joining on your lunch break that's a little bit late, or you've decided this is a topic that's really interesting for you, or maybe you're watching this on the recording. So this is live on LinkedIn at the moment. It's also being recorded for YouTube. So welcome to everyone who's watching. This is an impromptu one. We are normally live at 8:30 on every Friday, myself and Alex and a couple of guests or whoever is joining us at the time. But today we made some arrangements because we are joined by a very special guest, Anne Phillips. Thank you for joining. You are joining from Atlanta, where I hear it's even warmer potentially than it is here at the moment in the UK. Of course it is, it always is. And it's amazing to have you with us. Thank you for joining.
No, thank you, and thank you for not making me get up at 3 a.m. for this.
We thought we'd be kind to you. Next time, you'll be able to do it. No, it's great to have you with us. And there's a couple of reasons that we wanted to do this. So obviously you can see the role of technology in creating a truly human experience at work is the key topic. But you've got some incredible books that are coming out. Actually, they're published already, so they're coming. Actually, here in the UK, they're not released until later in June, and then again in September. So really wanted to delve in and hear your expertise and all of the research and the kind of findings that you've been going through in building those two. I'm really excited to read them myself when I get my hands on them. And today's just a conversation. It's a conversation about those two fundamental things that have kind of collided, especially in the last year, but were colliding anyway. Technology and human. And what does this mean? What does this mean for people going through digital transformation right now? What does this mean in terms of the future of technology and how we ensure that the human experience is not lost in all of that? So thank you for joining. It's great to have you with us.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Perfect. Well, let's get in. So we've got our first question. All right, so this is kind of a why the human experience. Why is everyone in this world of digital age, why are we talking about human connection? What is it? Why is that happening in organizations right now?
So, I mean, the interesting thing is we've all been thrown into this heavily tech-infused, tech-dependent world over the past 15 months, right? With everything that's going on with the pandemic. We've had to switch to the way we interact with people. We're now doing work virtually and through screens. We're buying all of our groceries that way. We're having meetings that way. All of this. And it's actually highlighted the fact that we are missing the human connection. And people are realizing, you know what? I'm tired of seeing my colleagues through this, however size kind of box that I'm looking at. And I'm tired of having meetings this way. And I really want to meet people in person. I think before we went live, you were just saying that you were with some colleagues in person out in the sunshine. It makes a huge difference. We're all social creatures. And while technology can absolutely make our lives easier and help us to connect to people the way we are right now, thousands of miles away, right? We couldn't have done that without this technology. It also, if you're too dependent on it, or if you're not intentional about the way you use it, it could really help us use it as a crutch, and it could actually destroy and get in the way of some of our real human connections.
That's a really good point. I'm fascinated by that because while you're talking, I'm thinking about the fact that so many people have become really comfortable in their own kind of personal bubbles at home or wherever it is that they are or have been working, particularly through lockdowns. And actually, exactly that. You can use it as a substitute and almost forget the benefits that you get from being in a rich human environment where there's more people around you socially. And almost when I first came back to the office and I was around people, I totally forgot all the complexity and the nuances of almost like the sideways stuff that I'd been missing.
That's right. When your whole world is limited to a rectangular box in front of you, I mean, it really is limiting what you can do with that. And how you can connect. And this is not, I mean, this also existed pre-pandemic, right? But the pandemic highlighted kind of this need and this urge and this danger that we have of slipping into being too dependent on the technology for human connection. In the same way that, you know, we might have hundreds of friends on social media, but how many real connections do we actually have on a daily basis, right? So if we're so focused on posting our pictures and telling everybody on social media what we've done today, how often are we actually living in that moment and making the connections with people who are there physically with us at that moment?
There's also a really interesting point, isn't there? And you're absolutely right. There's also this element of inclusion and like, how do we make people feel included in this hybrid world where our worlds are completely potentially very different, and technology kind of enables it, but also technology can get in the way, and we build technology with bias behind it. So how to making it having human leadership, having human experience, how does it mold technology for the future? That's always been a really interesting point for me.
I'm so glad that you brought that up, because, you know, I've been studying technology and people and the connection that we have to technology for a long time, actually, even before I became a researcher. I've always kind of balanced, you know, in this weird world between, you know, the very analytical and data driven and science, and at the same time the humanities too. I've always kind of done a little bit of both and have swayed back between both. And I think that there really is a couple of ways to look at this. One is technology, and I think we forget this, right? Technology exists for what? If it doesn't exist to make things better, if it doesn't exist to make our lives better, the world's better, then why does it exist, right? And we lose sight of that sometimes. So we lose sight of the fact that technology is supposed to make things better. The other aspect that we lose sight of is the fact that technology, and this is something that I wrote about in the first book that I published 2 years ago, is this idea that technology in and of itself isn't going to change the world. It's actually the innovation and the minds behind it. To your point, Ant, the minds behind the technology, the creativity behind the technology that can figure out how to use it in a way that will make our lives better, how to use it in a way that is more intentional, how to use it in a way that's not going to be biased, right? That's going to create more equality, that's going to support all the values that we say that we believe in as human beings. And that has to be a shift in mindset. So how do you then begin to get everybody, not just the way they're using the technology, but those that are involved in shaping and creating that technology to do this all from a very human-centered kind of perspective. So design technology, services, processes, experiences that are better for customers, that are better for employees, that are better for people, that are better for the planet.
Love that so much. Because you're right, it's that higher purpose. Again, when people are going through that digital transformation, it's again saying, well, why? Why put technology there? It has to be intentional, and it has to also have the intended outcome of creating a better experience for the human. And that human is internal, it's the employee, but also it's the customer, right? And I think too much has often been focused on the customer, and maybe not enough on the internal employee. Alex, what are you thinking? I can almost see the cogs whirring around.
Always, right? So that's why I'm quite good spontaneously, because I'm not very good at scripted stuff. I'm sitting there thinking about how people have done exactly that, how people have used the tech to be really human. And an example of actually an idea that I pinched from someone else because they did it to me, which I found just really powerful, was something so simple. And it's the simple things, I think, that bring the humanity back. So someone sent me an email, I think it was just in, you know, the week after lockdown was just announced here in the UK. And they just sent an email sort of saying, hi. And then in brackets, they just put in brackets with a little star, I'm sitting down next to you quietly. And it was just so nice, because what they'd done was they'd painted a picture. They'd created what they would be doing in this scenario if they were allowed to be with me physically in person. And it wasn't like, I wish I could give you a hug right now. It was the actual description of by the way, I'm sitting here. And I started to use that myself, and I found it really powerful with lots of people, family, friends, and colleagues, in terms of saying, you know, when something bad happened, in brackets, I'm holding your hand. And it's like, that actually, that touches people in a way that it almost more so than if you were there touching their hand, because you found a way to find like the connection and the humanness using the tech with the barriers in place. And that's what I love about kind of innovating in the space of barriers. So I love innovation, but having barriers for me makes me so much more innovative, because it's like, right, how can we do something about this? And we know that, you know, from research, that makes innovation and creativity so much better. So I'm constantly, my kids hate it, I'm constantly telling them, you know, like, that there's barriers in the way and they have to innovate around them to do what they want to do. But it is true though, right? And the research shows that. So actually, you know, the best communicators, the best kind of people who I've seen do that human experience, they don't see any tech as a barrier, and they use it in the way that is just so brilliant. And I've loved it. I've loved seeing that coming through from people who are just really just thinking beyond the structure that's given.
I love that. I really love that. Alex, I'm going to pinch that from you.
Pinch it. I pinched it. I'm a magpie. I pinch everything.
Are you, in the research that you're working on, like, I get a lot of, obviously we speak to a lot of people every day about the human-centered design, human leadership, what that means. What are you seeing from the kind of the research side of things on the impact that it has on businesses, maybe long-term, but also short-term, and things like the impact on agility, on well-being, on all of these things that are being talked about, ESG is being talked about at a board level, you know? What are you seeing, hearing, noticing?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because this, I would say, is, you know, the beginning of it's the core of what we've written about in the technology fallacy a couple of years ago. And the subtitle of that book is How People Are the Key to Digital Transformation. And so what we see is that the companies, you know, Alex, you talked a little bit before about innovation and being creative and having a problem, and, you know, using that barrier as a way to think in creative ways and get beyond that. Mm-hmm. Well, the companies that we see that actually do this well, that actually can be more innovative, that are more creative, that are bringing new ideas and new models and new products and services to the marketplace, those are the companies that actually have a different approach to the way they handle people and talent, and the way their entire mindset around the importance of people. Because if you think about the way technology, you know, we're in the midst of some trends right now, right? So technology is evolving in a way where it's changing the nature of the work that we do, right? It's going to replace all the repetitive stuff that we've been doing, the potentially dangerous stuff, the really monotonous things, and that frees it up for us to tap into our most human capabilities, right? Around empathy, around creativity, around problem solving, around critical thinking. If you think about it, you know, technology, even the best AI will not necessarily solve the problem you have, right? Because one, it doesn't necessarily understand the problem, at least from a human-centric perspective of, you know, what is this problem? And two, it just doesn't have the capability. It doesn't have that general intelligence to be able to creatively think about how to solve that problem. So if we think about that, then we know and we must understand that humans are the key to any kind of problem solving that we want, any kind of creativity, any kind of innovation, any kind of progress that we want to make. We're at, you know, the helm of that, and humans can actually make it happen, or we've also seen humans get in the way of it because of just the nature of human beings. Sometimes we can be resistant to change, right? And if you focus on how to bring out sort of more the positive elements of human behavior and focus on the human connection, that's where we get to this whole concept of work better together. It's really about how human relationships can not only bolster well-being in the organization, but also ultimately impact the bottom line, because it's really about how do you focus on, you know, putting people in an environment where they're going to be their most human, where they're going to be the most creative, where they're going to be the most innovative, where they're going to do all the things that you really want them to do. Because if you're talking about just using them as kind of a cog in a machine, I mean, you can actually get a machine to do that instead. So how do you really want humans to play in your organization? What role do you want them to take in your organization? And when you realize that that's where your power and creativity lies, then it naturally means that you have to be a human-centric organization.
I love that. I'm sitting there just thinking about Bailey and French. I should be thinking about our clients and customers, but I'm thinking, yeah, we need to be doing this and we need to be doing that. Because it prompts you, doesn't it? It's like, oh, you know, we hear people first, we hear human-centric, but I was talking to someone earlier who works in a similar space to us, and they were saying, you know, we've been doing this human experience stuff for, you know, 10, 11 years, but it's just not become important enough for everyone else until the pandemic hit. Now, all of a sudden, it is the most important factor, and it's just accelerated and amplified. And it's done the same for our vision around humanizing the world of work. It's just accelerated and amplified that need to make sure that as organizations, we don't miss that bit, that we don't get too comfortable in the tech and lose the beautiful humanness and that fabric. And I often wonder how much of it is subconscious, actually. Because, you know, even with a group of psychologists that we have constantly analyzing and observing everything on around us. And I've been working in the field for a long time, and then coming into the office and then really noticing and being shocked about the impact of being around people again. When I knew that was coming, it's like, it doesn't matter that you know it's coming, it's still going to be a shock because it's so different to what you've been experiencing. And it's that subconscious. How do we bring that to the forefront of our attention enough to make it really powerful?
I think that's exactly right, Alex. How do we do that? How do we actually create an environment where we're constantly thinking, you know, humans first? And you're right, there are lots of companies that say it, right? But how many actually have that kind of perspective? I think that what's happened during the pandemic has really highlighted the importance of that, because we've seen what happens when people are burned out. We've seen what happens when people are stressed and have to balance so many different things. I think mental health and well-being have been on CEO agendas this past year in a way that they have not been before. And I think that that's really telling, right? Because we've seen what can happen when we don't pay attention to that. And so I think if there's any year that's going to convince people, hey, you've got to pay attention to how your people are doing, and what kind of environment you're creating for them to thrive in, I think it's going to be this year. And the companies that don't take advantage of that, you know, they're going to be challenged in terms of, you know, the whole war for talent.
Absolutely. You know, we're seeing retention is going to become a huge focus this year for many organizations, because lots of people haven't moved because of the pandemic. They've sat still for ages. And so there's a natural turnover, isn't there? There's a natural want and desire to learn and experience something new. And if the company isn't offering or hasn't lived up to the values that you think are important now, and hasn't allowed you to evolve, then it's much easier to look sideways and see something else. And I think that's already happening from what we see, certainly in the UK and further afield. And I'm really interested to know what trend is that going to create? What is that going to create in 6 to 12 months? This focus on retention and recruitment. I mean, it'll essentially recruitment relentlessly for the next couple of years, I'm sure. And some of those companies will, then the need and the focus of that will increase the urgency to become a human-centric organization and know what that really means. So I wonder whether we're going to start to see, you know, I know we've got human resource kind of directors of roles, but I wonder whether we're going to see kind of human experience directors start to evolve now, in the same way that we see titles given to those roles that are critical roles for the organization when new big things come up. I'd love to see that. Actually, I wonder if it's
I would too. I'm hopeful, Alex, that this is kind of the wake-up call and that people are going to, you know, shift their perspective, because I think you're right. I think we're already starting to see people, they've had a lot of time to think, right? Over the past 15 months, they've had a lot of time to think about what it is that's important to them. And so it's going to be more important for people to find a company that they can work for that they believe in, right, and that they feel believes in them. And so it's about how do you become a human-centric organization, but also how do you become a purpose-driven organization too? And that was something that we found in our research over this past year. And this is the transformation myth that's coming out in September. It's this idea that, you know, you can help get through challenging times and crises if you are rooted in a strong sense of purpose as an organization, right? Because that's what pulls people together. That's what makes people believe. I mean, we as human beings need a sense of purpose, a reason to get up every day, right? And if we can feel connected to our organization's sense of purpose, that enables us to be more engaged as well. So I think it kind of works both ways in the sense of, you know, how do you be human centric and at the same time give people sort of you know, something to rally around.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, sorry, that's just buzzing my head completely. I'm going, Ant, were you going to say something then? You were nodding.
I was, and then I had sirens outside, so I thought I'd best be quiet for a little bit. I just love it, and I love the idea of having some kind of accountability for a human experience. You know, someone that's really driving and pushing that, and that's going to be multiple stakeholders. But I love what you've just said there. It's really practical and tangible. And you know, we need people to be focused on how. Actually, so I haven't met many people who have gone, what you're talking about is absolute rubbish. But I don't know how to do it. And I think what you were starting to touch on there was how, and I'm really interested in the next concept is.
Well, I mean, so it's a basic concept, right? So to your point, you haven't met a lot of people who said, well, that's, you know, that's crazy, right? So it seems like a basic concept, but it's something that I think that people think it's so basic that sometimes it could be dismissed. Right. So, okay, well, that makes a ton of sense. So, you know, it's not new, it's not earth shattering, but the heart of it is that people haven't prioritized it enough to really, you know, move the needle on it, so to speak. Right. So they haven't prioritized it enough to actually change the way they're operating as an organization. And this boils down to the way the company thinks and behaves. So if you think about like us as individuals, we all have mindsets and behaviors and personalities, right? Well, the personality of an organization is its culture. So how do you then infuse that personality with all the values, including valuing human, you know, centeredness and human well-being into that? And I think that that's harder than people think. And because it sounds so basic, it sounds so simple, I think people dismiss it and say, well, that's easy. I'm going to tackle something harder. Well, you know, hey, the news is actually, this is the hard stuff. And we've seen over and over again, people say, we talk to executives all the time, even technology leaders in there. They say things like, hey, I can figure out the technology. I can solve all these other problems. What I can't do is figure out how to get my people to think differently. I can't figure out how to change, you know, the mindset of my organization. I can't figure out how to remove these internal barriers in people's heads. That's the hard thing. And we don't realize that it is the hard thing, but it is. And in my years of, you know, so I started off as a management consultant, then moved into research. So I've done a number of different types of projects and work. And in everything I've done, it hasn't been the work itself that's been challenging. It is almost always been people, culture, mindset. And it's not an easy thing to change. So how do you do it? You begin by acknowledging that that's the reality. And then how do you begin to infuse that? And some of this is, you know, setting an example at the leadership level, at all leadership levels, to say, you know, we're going to think differently. We are going to be focused around these values. And how do you then hammer home those values every day and figure out how to translate those values into daily behaviors? And then how do you begin to reward those behaviors above other behaviors, right? So let's reward the behaviors of things that we value as opposed to things that we don't value. And how do we begin to practice that? Because to your point, Alex, when you were talking about this person who shared this small little gesture, you know, by saying, I'm sitting right next to you, how do you begin to take a lot of those small steps and behaviors and then spread it across the organization so that people begin to think differently. And if you look at any psychologist who writes about like habit formation, they begin by saying start by doing little small things.
Yeah.
And then eventually those small things will begin to help define you and the way you think.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm sitting here and I've got one big question on my mind whilst we're talking. Is it infusing or is it uncovering? So for me, there's something about like, how do we actually, maybe it's not about change. Maybe it's about like stripping the layers off and allowing people's true sense of self to become
I love that.
present and finding the difference and the uniqueness about individuals. Rather than the change towards something different. So they're kind of like not changing culture, but like really evolving it, I guess, so that you're really at that space of growing together. So it's all about growth and it's very positive rather than trying to assess and kind of diagnose and then fix. But then there's also that other piece as well about the education piece, is that same within the kind of the well-being market. You know, there was a time where everyone was just trying to work out what is well-being? What do we mean by well-being? So what is the human experience? What do we mean by the human experience? And then once we've worked that out, we just assume we've done it, which is to your point, right. You know, it's like, oh yes, that's obvious. Now we know it. Now we can talk about it. We've got language, that's fine. But actually, there's a next step, isn't there, which is the skill development around that. So now we know what it is and we know what we need to tackle and how big it is and the research and the data behind it and the damage, essentially, if we don't fix it, the business case. But now what are the skills we need to develop to make that better in our organization? And I think that's the bit that people move on from quite quickly, right? Label it, we've got it, repository full of information for people. We know what it is. We're talking about it, but have we actually done it? And that's that's a big question.
And that's where, you know, measurement comes in. So how do you begin to measure something like that? And how do you begin to track it? Because if you really want to make a difference, you know, you can't manage it, the old adage, right? You can't manage it if you can't measure it. So how do you figure out a way to begin to try to, it's a tough thing to measure, right? It's hard to measure things that are, you know, qualitative as opposed to quantitative. But there are ways, right, to do that. And they could be present in your turnover numbers. They could be present in your engagement numbers. You know, there are lots of other indicators to see whether or not there's been a difference.
Yeah.
I love this. I love this so much because it's exactly the type of conversation that needs to be happening more and more throughout the next few months, actually, because there is going to be another shift coming. And that people do need, you know, everyone seems to be going
to worship.
September will be fine. You know, we'll think about it in September. September's coming around the corner.
Rapidly.
So, yeah, pretty quick. So it's a brilliant conversation to be having, and thank you.
Yeah.
I'm conscious there's only a couple of minutes left actually, which is slow. But is there anything else? Any kind of 1-2 nuggets you've taken from your learnings and that you want to share with people?
So you know, the one thing that we didn't totally touch on is when we talked about how this happens and this whole idea of what happens in September and you know, returning to the office place. A question I get often is, you know, well, what's the best way to do it? And the answer is there really is no one size fits all, right? And what we're going to be facing is a lot of experimentation. And so I would just encourage companies to experiment and learn from it. So test and learn. One, understand your people, right? Understand what it is that they value and they appreciate, right? And more studies are showing that people want, in the knowledge workplace, people want more flexibility. They want flexibility around when and where they work, right? And how they get their work done. So how can companies begin to tap into what it is their employees are looking for, and begin to try to figure out how to make this work, especially in a hybrid situation. You talked earlier, Ant, about you know, bias technology or technology that you know, can maybe make it challenging for some people, right? So if you think about a hybrid workplace and you have a team that's in a meeting, half of them are in person, the other half are are online, how do you prevent the people who are dialing in, virtually, from feeling like second-class citizens, or feeling like they're not really there in the room, or feeling that they're not engaged? And all of that is, let's figure this out. Let's test this. Let's see what works. Let's promote the things that are working really well, or come up with new solutions, right? So is there a way to make that technology better so that people aren't feeling like they're so removed from what's happening in real life? So.
Love that so much. Thank you for sharing. And I'm conscious we'll probably lose our LinkedIn viewers, but for those watching on the recording, they'll be able to grab the next just a few minutes. I've got a couple of questions that have been coming through, also by text, because of people watching and wanting to know a little bit more. Those are kind of some of the habits. What do you see as some of the potential blockers that might get in people's way as they start to do this? As they start to make this change, what are you noticing, seeing, and then are there ways that they can get around those? Or is it, as you said, test, repeat, try, experiment, see what's coming up for you and take it bit by bit?
Yeah, I definitely think the testing part and experimenting part is huge, and that requires the organization to have this mindset around testing, right? So I really don't like the term failure. It's really about what can we learn from this and how can we use that to design a better solution, right? So that's going to be key. But when you asked before about what the barriers are, what we often see as probably the biggest thing is, you can look at it as a lack of will, or an inability, or maybe just not prioritizing this high enough on the agenda. Because as things happen, day-to-day problems and issues are going to rise, and they're going to, they often get in the way, and they often get, the priority. So how do you decide how important this is, and how do you make sure it stays as a high priority for the organization? And that's ultimately the key. You can only focus on so many things at once, and you can only prioritize so many things at once. So if this is really important, how do you make sure it rises up to the top?
I'll unmute myself. That's a blocker. Priorities are always a difficult one, right? And companies will prioritize this if, as Alex, you were talking about earlier, retention, engagement, productivity, well-being. I guess as companies start to see the impact of this on those things, people will take more note and prioritize this a little bit more. Maybe. We should
yeah,
see.
I hope.
Yeah, I hope so. Well,
that's my hope.
It's been fantastic, and thank you. I'm going to close off, and there are other questions, but I'm going to put them on LinkedIn for people to share them and engage with it on an ongoing basis. Thank you so much for joining for the last half an hour. How can people find out more about your couple of books that you've got coming out June and September?
So they can check me out on LinkedIn or on Twitter. I'm under Anh Phillips on LinkedIn, and also on Twitter as well. And I've posted links to both books that are available. So the first one is called Work Better Together, and that's out in just under 2 weeks from today. And the other one is called The Transformation Myth, and it's somewhat of a sequel to the first book that we wrote, which is called The Technology Fallacy. So thanks so much for having me here. I love talking about this stuff. As you can tell, I'm super passionate about all of this. So always an opportunity to share some of that thinking and research with people. Thanks.
Thank you so much. It's great to have your insights and to think about all the research that you've done into these topics as well, and bring that into the conversation that our clients are having on a daily basis with all the challenges that we're facing at the moment. So it's brilliant. Thank you so much, Anh.
Oh, my pleasure. And enjoy the beautiful sunny day there.
Yeah, we will. I won't go back onto the beach. I think I've had my beach time. I think I should do some work now. But thank you for joining us. It's great. And we will be talking about your book and sharing this wonderful conversation with many people, I think, because it's really, really resonant. And I appreciate our human approach to it. Having a conversation, that's where it all starts, right? So thank you. Appreciate it.